So hello, welcome. My name is Emma Kopko, and I am the Assistant Director for Recruitment and Admissions at the iSchool, which is the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And I am part of the group that has put on InfoCon. So it's about 15 different schools of information science across the country. And we're all working and collaborating together to promote information sciences as a whole, rather than try to compete for students or see each other as competitors. So we are excited to talk a little bit today about making information accessible, and especially accessibility of graduate and doctoral programs in LIS and STEM fields. So we're going to go about 40 minutes. We do have 3 faculty members who will present their research and what they're working on and their interest. And then we can also have time for question and answers. So feel free to put any questions you have in the chat box that I will monitor. I also want to encourage you all to check out the InfoCon website. We have a whole bunch of different panels tomorrow as well. Tomorrow is the final day of the InfoCon event, but there are some really great topics being discussed tomorrow. So if you have availability, feel free to check out some of those sessions and join them if you're so inclined. All right, let's get started. So a little bit about the 2 institutions that are participating in this panel today. We have the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. It's located in Central Illinois. We are a Research One institution. We are ranked among the top 25 universities around the world by the Center for World University Rankings from 2021 to 2022. We are about 125 years old at the iSchool, the School of Information Sciences. We are approaching our 125th year of existence, which is very exciting. We've had over 20,000 students come through our program. And we are the #1 ranked LIS program in the country, and we have been ranked #1 since 1996. And our other institution participating today is Simmons University. This is located in Boston, Massachusetts. It is a pioneering liberal arts educational institution that's designed for undergraduate women, and it's been integrated with professional work experience since 1899, pardon me. U.S. News and World Report ranked Simmons as #4 in best value in the Regional Universities North category. And then they are also one of the top ranked library and information sciences programs in the nation as well. So we're excited to have a nice collaborative conversation here from 2 different institutions that do work together, at least in terms of the same kind of research and work they're doing in information sciences. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about who we have on the panel today. So our first presenter will be Maria Bonn. She is the Associate Professor and the MS-LIS and CAS Program Director at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. We also have Rebecca Davis, who is an Assistant Professor in the School of Information Science at Simmons University. And we also have Danielle Pollock, who is an Assistant Professor in the School of Information Sciences at Simmons as well. So welcome. Thank you all for taking time to be here. We appreciate it and look forward to our conversation. So the first thing we're going to talk about is Maria Bonn's personal interest, research interest in her current project. So Maria, you are welcome to unmute yourself and talk about these amazing photos that we see on the screen here.
You bet. Yeah, the photos are to both remind me what to talk to you all about, and also to keep me disciplined because I get excited and there are so many things that I could be talking about. I've been focused on a particular aspect of accessibility to education and graduate programs in particular, which is financial accessibility. We all know education can cost a lot, and that's tuition, and that's the cost of living. You have to pay rent, and you have to feed yourselves and your families if you have families. And we have a lot of strategies for addressing this. But one piece of the cost of education that I've been focused on is that for what we could call broadly course materials. And course materials can include things like your safety glasses and gloves if you work in a lab, but particularly the materials that we use for our classes that are books and other educational resources that the teachers assign. The cost of those can really add up, and that's gotten a lot of attention over the past few years, that besides the cost of tuition, students can spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars a semester on course materials. And this can be a real barrier to access to graduate programs, to education in general. The picture on the far left, need books, no worries, donate plasma. It's not a joke. It's not even a bad joke. It was an actual advertisement that was up on college campuses a few years ago. And I think a questionable choice. But this also got quite a bit of internet buzz when a professor who was very active on Twitter said, "My God, a student just wrote me an email saying she was worried about how much blood she needed to donate to be able to afford her textbooks." And she became this kind of moment on Twitter where it was like, "Oh, I've seen that. Can you believe they're doing that? Are people really doing this?" Thinking about the cost of their course materials might cause them to. And there's a blog post out I could share at some point that says, "I paid for my textbooks in blood." That's a little memoir of a woman who actually did this, and she talks about the process of donating her blood and getting paid for it so she could afford her course materials. So we think about what are some alternatives. And one alternative is open educational resources, materials that are deliberately created, usually by scholars, but not always, sometimes by people in practice, to help educate, and that are free of charge. And these can be full-length textbooks, huge things for like Psychology 101 or Economics 101. They can also be learning materials like videos, slide decks, podcasts, lesson plans, things that instructors can use, all that are in part designed to bring down the cost of education. And I've been studying that, but also studying the ways in which they create a space where these materials are licensed in a way that they can be reused, redistributed, revised. If you don't like your textbook, get together with some students and revise it. Then you can redistribute it. And this helps make these materials more accessible and more tailored to the needs of the students. So these are the kinds of things I've been working on. The accessibility case studies for scholarly communication librarians and practitioners is a resource that I have helped develop, part of a group I'm working with, which is people from practice saying students need to know more about how web design should be accessible so that we can help communicate scholarship and scientific findings. And so some people who have been working on that put together this book, which is free for you to read, but that you can also take and add to, redistribute, share. These are the things that you can go on with open educational resources. That's an area I'm working in. And the last thing before I hand it over to my colleagues, who I know have a lot to say, one of the reasons I'm interested in this as an educator in library and information science, you might be interested in this, is that there are jobs in this area. Here it's described as a newly emerging role in academic libraries. And if you start looking, you'll see a lot of open education librarians. Or there are student success librarians, and open education is also often part of that job description. Maybe for a job you want to help faculty create these educational resources. Maybe you want to help them find one that works for their class. Maybe you want to create one yourself. But there are jobs in this area in a wide variety of institutions. This one was at Ohio State University, big research, and lots in the community college space. A lot of community college students are taking advantage of open educational resources, and their faculty want to too, and they need librarians who will help them. So that's one kind of accessibility to education. And I think my colleagues have some other perspectives on accessibility.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maria. All right, next we will talk to, oh my goodness, my slides are all over the place here. We'll talk about Rebecca Davis's research and current projects that she is working on.
Okay, thank you. So my research really focuses on areas of diversity in academic libraries, but also for the purposes of this particular panel, I'm going to talk more about the projects that I work on with my colleague, Dr. Danielle Pollock, focusing on first generation graduate students. So one of the projects that we have been working on actually relates to looking at the information needs of first generation graduate students. We really found that there wasn't much research out there that focused on that group. So we thought that we would start doing research on that group to find out more about what's happening. So for this particular project, we decided that we really want to examine information and look at those information behaviors and the needs in terms of focusing on decision making. So when first generation graduate students are thinking about graduate school, how are they making those decisions? Who are they talking to? Where are they going when they're trying to search for information? How are they using that information that they're finding? And also thinking about their careers as well. So what do they actually want to do once they have achieved their goals and they've actually have their degrees? So what Dr. Pollock and I did was we actually recruited first generation graduate students from an institution in the Northeast, and we interviewed 34 students last summer. And what we found pertaining to their decisions, especially when they're interested in pursuing graduate education, is that they really go to the university's website to find out more information about the particular program that they're interested in. They also mentioned that they talk to the admissions advisor as well. That's someone that was able to help them in terms of providing more information about the program, about applying to graduate school and what they actually needed. They also talk with their coworkers, specifically coworkers that already had master's degrees, so that they'd already gone through getting those degrees and have that knowledge, along with their supervisors and their bosses. They really were some of the ones who encouraged them in terms of actually pursuing their graduate education. They also mentioned friends as well, specifically their friends that also had master's degrees. So again, really thinking about people and seeking out people who already have those degrees to try and find out a little bit more about what they went through and determining whether or not they actually want to go to graduate school. What we found too, in addition to the fact that there were very positive things in terms of how they were deciding to pursue their graduate education, is that there were also some issues that they had when making those decisions. They also talked about the fact that they needed more information about their financial support, how much financial aid they would be able to receive, also finding out more information in some instances about the cost of the programs too. So something that several students suggested is that it would actually be helpful to have a kind of one-stop shop website where each institution was listed with the programs and degrees that they offered, along with how much they cost, the different modalities in which courses are offered as well, whether they're offered in person or online. So having all of that information together would really help them, especially when they're trying to make those decisions about going to graduate school, and also deciding which institution they want to attend, so that they're able to compare that information and really make those decisions that are going to better suit them with their needs and the programs that they want to apply for. We also talked to students and asked them about their career decisions. So again, asking them what they plan to do in terms of using their degrees and how they're making those decisions. And the reasons why what they talked about when thinking about making decisions about what they're going to do with their degrees. They talked about going back to their coworkers and their supervisors and that encouragement. They're actually the ones that encourage them to not only pursue those graduate degrees, but they encourage them to do that so they could advance in their current careers. For some of them, it was advancing in those current careers, or for others, it was because they were trying to make career changes. So they wanted to do something else. So that's the reason that they were actually pursuing their graduate degrees. And so all of that information has actually been very helpful in terms of learning more about first generation graduate students and what they're doing, but also their decision making in terms of where they're going, what they actually need, and their suggestions about what could be done to make their decision making better in the future, and what would help those who are also thinking about pursuing graduate education. I did want to mention before turning this over to my colleague that is the fact that we also asked the students about COVID-19 and how that had an impact on them and their graduate studies, and also their decisions about careers as well. And if there's time during Q&A, we can also talk more about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. And then finally, we have Dr. Danielle Pollock, who is going to, oh, I'm so sorry, I left a bullet point off. But Dr. Pollock is going to share her research interests and then also talk about the current projects she's working on solely and then in collaboration with Dr. Davis as well.
Thanks so much. So like Dr. Davis, I'm going to focus a lot on my research around accessibility of graduate school to first generation students. And how I first became interested in first generation student information needs is because I study research communities. And one of the things I got interested in is, how do people become researchers? How do they choose those careers, which you usually need an advanced degree or maybe more than one to be able to enter? Particularly those individuals from historically underrepresented groups. There were a lot of ties in the literature between diversity of organizations and diversity of research teams and innovation. And I started looking at first generation students. You know, they're innovators. They're the people who are the first in their families to pursue higher education. And this question of, why do first generation students decide to go to graduate school, or in some cases, why not? And what barriers do they encounter? There's not a lot of research out there on it. Most research, not only in our field, but in most fields, is on undergraduates. We don't know a lot about how accessible graduate education is. And most services from libraries that are targeted at first generation students tend to be at undergraduates, typically within the first couple of years. Often our programs and services, both in academic libraries and in grad programs themselves, are designed around unspoken assumptions that students have knowledge and family experience that many students, and in particular many first generation students, just don't have. And there might be an assumption that students pick up this knowledge as undergraduates, and they may not necessarily. We started looking, in addition to our interview research, which Dr. Davis talked about, at some of the services that academic libraries were providing to first generation students now. In 2020 and 2021, we did a survey of library websites from libraries that were members of the ARL, the Association of Research Libraries, and found that very few were actually offering services to first generation students, though there were some. Only 2 addressed either graduate or professional first generation students. One of the other things we started to find out as we did our literature reviews, we did the reviews of the websites, and we started talking to people, is that first generation student is a very complicated thing to define. Typically in the United States, a definition that's very commonly used is a student whose parents did not graduate from college. But what if a student is raised by somebody other than a parent? They have a biological parent who has a degree, but that person is not a part of their life. What if they're a member of a large family and they have an older sibling in college? Is that person still a first generation student? What if they have a parent who has an associate's degree, a 2-year degree, or somebody who started college but didn't finish? Are they a first generation student? In the case of a graduate student, it gets a little bit more complicated because, as our research is uncovering, if a student is the first in their family to go to graduate school, even if they have a parent with an undergraduate degree, that parent might lack the specific knowledge to be able to help them when applying for and obtaining a master's or a PhD. One of the studies that we looked at found about 16 different definitions of first generation students. We decided to go out and look at, because we're finding out that students most commonly interact with the university through the website, if a student goes to a university website, how is first generation student defined there? We looked at the same 118 institutions we did for a library study. And among those 118 different institutions, we found there were 85 different definitions of first generation student, all of with unique sets of criteria of what a first generation student is and isn't. And that makes first generation student a difficult concept to study, for one thing, particularly with quantitative research. It can be hard to compare data from two different institutions or studies from two different researchers if they use different definitions. Another thing that we're going to be exploring is this murkiness in the definition itself a barrier to access to services? If services are targeted at first generation students and a student is wondering, am I first gen or not? They might get different answers depending on where they go. Even within a single institution, we found that many had multiple definitions on multiple different web pages. Some had more than one definition on a single web page. So that's a complicated question. But we think it's one that's worth exploring because understanding the needs of first generation graduate students, and in particular, what assumptions are being made about what students know, what students are capable of accessing, some of the things that when we get into higher education, we tend to take for granted and not define. What are office hours? What's a FAFSA? What are the different types of professors and which ones can be my advisor? Knowing that and making that explicit can help us identify and lower the barriers, not only for first gens, but for all students.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing. So at this point, we're going to kind of open it up. So if you all want, or I'm sorry, Rebecca and Danielle, did you want to talk a little bit more about your collaboration together?
Nope, I think we covered all the things that we're currently running.
Okay, good. I just wanted to double check. But we're going to open it up for kind of a conversation part. That was my timer to make sure Dr. Maurice Pollock only took 5 minutes. I'm so sorry about that. But if you have questions that you want to pose to our panelists, if you have things that you want to share, feel free to do so now. You can either put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself. We don't have a particularly large group. There's a comment in the chat right now, though, from Graciela that says it's a very interesting point that varying programs define first gen differently. Some programs include students who their parents have undergrad degrees from different countries.
Yeah, we're finding that that is not one of the most common variables, but is emerging as a common variable if a parent or both parents have a degree from outside of the United States. You might be considered first generation. And the reason for that is somebody whose family has experience with a different university system might not, or might encounter some of the same information barriers when it comes to what are the assumptions that everybody knows about a US university, because everybody knows is a heck of an assumption.
Yeah, is it okay if I talk a little bit more about that actually?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the program I'm in, they defined it as that, and I remember feeling guilty at first because my father, he has an undergrad degree from Mexico. But once I started going through more classes and more time at my university, I quickly realized that it's extremely valid because it is a completely different system where you're pretty much in the dark. If you're, for example, I'm a first gen immigrant as well. And so it became very apparent that including that in a definition is pretty important because, I mean, I pretty much, my parents couldn't help me with applications or FAFSA or taxes and so forth. So it was a really big help to have resources as a first gen, I guess, degree holder at my university.
Yeah, that's something that we've also found with talking to first generation students too through our interviews with them, is having those resources there, and or I should say the need for them because of the questions that they have. And they also mentioned feeling embarrassed sometimes to ask questions or not knowing who to go to. And of course, not having a parent to go to necessarily. And so going to, that's why their coworkers and friends, especially who have gone through the process, were really big resources for them.
One question I'd like to ask you three panelists is, what are some of the barriers that you've noticed your own students might potentially encounter when they're seeking an LIS graduate degree.
I'll try one that I think is related to the questions of first generation, that of students who don't come from academic families. Many come into our LIS programs because they love books. Or they spent a lot of their childhood in libraries, and it's a place where they would like to be and to work. But they may be less comfortable with the academic space, and I don't just mean the logistics of like knowing how to apply for financial aid and register and things like that, but just sort of entering the conversation at the graduate level, knowing that they have a voice and they have experience and expertise they can contribute, sort of the ease in that space may not be built into them in the same way as students who have been in academic families for a long time. So I think that's one potential barrier. You can certainly overcome it with some practice and connections. That's one thing I was thinking about.
One of the things that I've noticed, having covered in my research, I know that other colleagues of mine have uncovered in theirs, is often there can be a barrier presented by the assumption that if students need information, if they need to make an exception to a policy, if they've got extraordinary circumstances, they will ask somebody. And oftentimes there can be barriers to feeling comfortable approaching a faculty member or administrator and asking, or even knowing that there is something to ask, that a request can be made, and that can vary by student family experience with the academy.
I think one barrier that I've noticed, especially with, because I teach one of the core courses, so first year graduate students take my course is the reference course, is students feel like they need to come in with library experience, because there are some students that have that experience and some that don't. And when the students who have experience are talking up and speaking up, sometimes they feel uncomfortable, like I should already know this, or I should have that experience too. And so I always start off in class by saying it's not expected that you come into this program and start this program having experience working in a library or working in an archive or a museum. You're going to be learning some foundational information that you can apply. And I also make sure to let them know that if they've worked in retail, if they worked in restaurants, having that customer service experience also is experience that they can use when they're in this program as well, because a lot of the work that we do is working with people, so they're able to use those skills that they have in the program and as they move on professionally too.
Thank you all for your responses. There's another question in the chat. What is the main difference in your research between a master's degree and a PhD in the first generation of graduate students?
That is something that we definitely intend to explore a lot more in the future. One of the things we noticed, because a lot of our interviews were with master's students, they often enter the program because somebody they encountered in the workplace, in particular a supervisor often, or sometimes another coworker, encouraged them to do so. And that might be something that could be fairly common in a profession like ours, where somebody might be working in a library or an archive as a paraprofessional before getting the master's degree. I don't know that it's as common in things like chemistry or nuclear physics or something like that. So one of the things that we hope to be able to do is to expand our study to understand how different disciplines and how different levels of advanced degrees, are there differences in how people are choosing careers, how people are finding the professions, and how people are making the decision to go to grad school.
Maria or Rebecca, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, right now, not right now. I think that was great.
Okay. Rebecca, did you want to say something?
Oh no, I was just saying, I think that Danielle covered everything.
I will say one thing. I was thinking about financial accessibility, about people I knew in my own doctoral programs, that in terms of both getting family support in it for attending doctoral programs, there's a lot of like, how are we going to pay for that? Is that going to get you a job? That the students feel like they need to make the case that it's a financially viable path, and that and financial support is always important to all students, but that this could be very pressing for new doctoral students, especially if they come from non-academic families.
Absolutely. I want to shift the conversation just a little bit away from first-gen students and maybe just talk about the accessibility of graduate school and STEM designated programs as well. Is there anything that you've seen during your tenures as faculty members that prohibits students, aside from maybe some of the things that we've talked about in terms of having historical knowledge or familiarity with higher ed, and then financial resources as well? Are there other things that you've seen prevent students from applying to graduate programs in information sciences, or maybe that you've talked to students about and maybe didn't know that was something that they were struggling with and was preventing them from being successful in their program?
I think something that stands out to me and that I've heard some students say, specifically students of color, is not seeing someone who looks like them. And I know that's something that we do struggle with in this field, and also retaining people of color in this field. So that's definitely something that students struggle with. And when there are discussions in classes about diversity, often those students stand back and don't say anything because they already feel like they stand out anyway. So I think that's really something that is a barrier, and something that we're going to have to continue to work on, especially making this field more accessible to people of color. And, you know, representation does matter. And so that's something we always have to keep in mind.
Yeah, what Rebecca said, and I think that's something that we share with wider STEM, is historical underrepresentation and communities of color being underserved by academia. In wider STEM, and I do a lot of work with colleagues in computer science, there are gender issues that are very different from LIS. So women, non-binary folks, oh, and I remember what else I wanted to say is that accessibility in general to folks with disabilities. That's something where you look in the library literature, not only is often presented as a barrier to library users, may often be a barrier to LIS students as well as professional members of the workforce.
Thank you. So in that same kind of vein, what can faculty members do to try to make LIS programs more accessible to all populations, whether it's maybe neurodivergent students, LGBTQ communities, underrepresented minority groups, first generation students, as we've discussed, maybe international? We haven't talked about international students in programming yet.
I think thinking about the way we're approaching education, approaching the programs, and how we're marketing the programs as well. That's something that's important, who we're marketing to, where we're marketing, and not continuing to go to the same places all of the time. So thinking outside of the box when we're making those decisions. Also, as faculty, I know being more visible, I know that's something that we're always encouraged to be, is to be seen. So being out there, because that also helps to talk to students, talk to potential students, letting them know more about what's going on, but also working to make sure that our content is accessible to students, having, if there's someone there that can go through and look at the accessibility of our course content, that will help too, especially with students who may have disabilities, and even with international students, not making these assumptions about them or about anyone. So really thinking about that and how we're taking into consideration what we're doing, but how we're continuing to go to certain places, or how we're setting up our content. And I think continuing to learn and being open to making those changes is something we have to think about.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was thinking about the content should be accessible, but that it should also have reflect the experiences and the identities of the students, so that it's accessible, and that they're able to connect with it and say, like, yeah, this is a problem I've struggled with, or a thing that I've been thinking about too. Another thing I've been interested in, I haven't done work in this area, but I've been thinking about it, is if there are places where we should recruit, for example, creating pathways out of community colleges for people who have not felt ready for the full-on 4-year or more experience at a research university, but have wanted an education and have been creating that at something like a community college. Can we help build pathways for those students into our programs? And how might we do that?
Thank you all. So I know that we're getting close to time, but I'm wondering if there is a key takeaway that you would want anyone listening to this talk or watching the recording to walk away with about accessibility of LIS and STEM designated degree programs at the graduate level. What would it be, and perhaps why?
I'll put in a plug that you should know that these programs really want you, and we're very eager to have diversity in our programs, diversity of identity, and that can be color, gender, sexuality, but also economic diversity. And where we get excited when we have here in Illinois at a state institution, when we have out-of-state students. It's like, oh wow, we can have somebody from Maine who can chirp in with their experience, not just the Great Plains. And that if you do want to join us, and there are of course questions of qualifications in terms of academic preparedness, but there are people here like Emma who will work with you to try to make it possible for you to join us. So never be afraid to ask. It never hurts to ask.
I think one takeaway or something that I would say is that your experience matters. So everyone comes in with experiences that they can use and they can translate in some way, shape, or form into the programs that you're interested in. So don't think that you're coming in not knowing anything. Think about ways in which you can make connections with course content or make connections with the profession that you're interested in. And that too can really help. And as Maria said, there are always people, and we're always here to support you. We really want to bring in diverse students into our programs. And so just know that that support is there, but do know that you also have experience too that you can use if you're interested in pursuing any type of graduate career.
Yeah, just to echo what's already been said is you are coming into an LIS program with a great deal of knowledge, of experience, of cultural capital, and that's something we need. One of the things that when I first started looking at first generation students, it was something I was interested in, and just finding out that this hasn't been researched yet. This is something we could do a lot with. There's probably something that you're interested in right now that is a really interesting information problem that has not been researched yet. And you might be the one that we need to be able to get that started.
Absolutely. When I do my recruitment sessions, I always inevitably will have somebody that says, I have a stupid question. And there truly are no stupid questions, because if you have that question, chances are somebody else in the session also wants to know the answer as well, but they maybe just aren't comfortable asking it. So there are no stupid questions. We do always want diverse students, and diversity can be defined in so many different ways. For an LIS program, it could be defined as adding more men to our program. It could be international students, domestic students. It could be, from what Maria was saying, in geographic location, like where are pockets of students located that are looking for this degree, but perhaps don't have they don't have a state school to go to. They don't have resources in their area, but they're interested in, and there's a need for librarians in that area. So never be afraid to ask questions, I think, is probably the biggest takeaway here, and that everybody is accepted in a higher educational institution. We always want new and exciting ideas. We always want diverse people. We always want different opinions and different experiences brought to the table, so that we can continue to collaborate and to grow as an information sciences field. So with that, I believe I created a final slide here. Yes, I did. I should have looked at it prior to starting, but that's okay. So I just want to thank Dr. Bonn, Dr. Maurice Pollock, and Dr. Davis for being with us today. I appreciate you taking time out of your very busy teaching and administrative schedules and being here to talk a little bit about accessibility of graduate education and STEM designated programs as well. Thank you to everybody who also attended this session. It is being recorded so that we can upload it to our YouTube channel, which you can review all of the recordings from the panels from today and tomorrow's sessions. And then we also have a playlist from last year in case you were interested in, for whatever reason, going back and seeing what we did last year. So I'm going to just share very quickly the InfoCon website again. I do encourage you to just check out what's available tomorrow. This is the last session for today, so feel free to see what's available tomorrow. There might be some really great content in terms of digital accessibility, which has been a hot topic and something we touched on just slightly today. But there's a lot of really great professors that are going to talk about their research and how the field of information sciences kind of maybe flounders, maybe flourishes in the realm of accessibility. So join us tomorrow for more. Thank you again to the participants. Thank you again to the panelists. I appreciate your being here, and I hope this was an informative session for you. And I hope that if you are interested in connecting with either the iSchool at Illinois or the School of Library and Information Sciences at Simmons, you can connect with them via the email addresses that are on the screen right now. And I'm sure that we would all be happy to work with you and answer your questions and help find a pathway to graduate education for you. So thank you once again. Everybody have a wonderful evening. Stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.